What's up, guys? How's it going? So I thought I'd make a different video today, and I wanted to kind of talk about something that's been interesting me here lately, and that is Honey Bunches of Oats cereal. No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about paints. So, as you can see here, I have a big ass box of what used to be cereal, but it is now paint. Right in there, you can see a whole bunch of it. And today I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the paints that I use and why I use them, and what my recommendation would be for someone who is beginning painting as far as paints go. And maybe we'll talk about some other supplies, but for now, let's just stick with paints. This thing on. Okay. So what I have here is some pretty basic oil paint. It's from my local art store, Blick. Very, I think, popular store. I'm not too sure. I've only really bought art supplies in one place, which is my state. But they have a great online store. Their paint's very cheap. And it's great for beginners. It's more of a student grade paint. You may have heard people talking about, sorry, I was just checking the battery life here on this camcorder. You may have heard people talking about artist versus student grade paint and the quality of it. And while they both have their pros and cons, what I will say for a beginner is, when you're looking for paint that you can afford in bulk, which is really what's important when you're starting painting, because that's what the most really expensive part is about painting, it's very important to find paint that is cheap, one, readily available, two, and easily attainable, three. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's easy to find paint that you can afford, but may take long to find, that's not in stores or maybe always on back order. So you need to find a paint that works for you. And typically speaking, if you're starting out, the cheapest and highest quality paint you might be able to afford, depending on what your income is or where you are at a point in your life. Me, I'm still a student, so I can only afford student grade. But the reason that I use student grade is because it's a great learning lesson, because it shows you that you don't have to have the highest quality paint to paint well. And to be consistent with. And honestly, the more you practice with this type of paint, the more you learn how to paint, because it is a little harder to work with than some of the artist grade paints. So why don't we take a look at that now? So I pulled out a few here. Here's a good example right there. This is a Griffin Alkyd paint by Winsor & Newton, and it's a fast drying paint. It's more of an expensive brand of paint, but it's great quality. The benefits of this paint, I use it a lot, and I didn't used to use it, but I actually was using a lot of Liquin, and I noticed that I wasn't aware that there was a fast drying paint out here. And I'm a pretty big fan of Winsor & Newton. I like a lot of other brands of paint as well, but typically speaking, this is usually what's most readily available, in addition to Gamblin, which I'll show here in a sec. So I buy this a lot because it's easily attainable. It's relatively inexpensive, depending on what your definition of inexpensive is, and it's always usually available for the most part. Now, here's another example. One sec, wrong example. Still on? Yeah? Okay, cool. Let's get going again. So here's that other example I was talking about. I'm trying to not get my face stuck in the camera here anyways. So this is also by Winsor & Newton. It is not a fast drying oil paint, it's just a traditional oil paint. But I like to use this example because it really depends on the type of oil paints that you're using and color plays into that because it takes different pigments to make different paints and different mediums to make different paints. So you need to pay attention when you're buying paints because typically speaking, they're labeled as series, which if I can find here, if you can see that right there, I just want to get it so the camera can kind of focus in on it here. No, not happening. That's okay. Oh, there we go. If you can see right there, it says Series 1. Boom. So when you go into an art store, at least for me, they have them labeled for artist oil colors and even student grade oil colors. And it's important to look at what you're buying because if you buy a Series 3 or 2 or 4 or maybe even 5, God knows, they can get extremely expensive. If I remember correctly, I think maybe this was $5. It's a 1.25 fluid ounce tube, which is relatively speaking quite a lot. I've had this for probably a year now, and I mean, you can tell it's still got quite a bit of paint left in it because you don't need a lot because it's a very vibrant color. Now, the different colors you buy may be more expensive. For example, this is this is permanent alizarin crimson. But if this were to be maybe a shade of yellow, that's not very popular, maybe like an Indian yellow or some type of cadmium yellow that not a lot of people use, they tend to get expensive. They can be upwards of $8 to $10 for this exact same size or smaller. And you may have to use more of it. So you always need to pay attention when you go into an art store and buy paints because they can get very expensive. And if you ever have a problem figuring out what you need, you can always ask. I ask a lot, even now. I've learned a lot over the past year and a half or whatever I've been painting. And the main thing that I learned is if I don't know, ask someone who does because they have more experience than I do selling it. And I take their word for it unless I do my research. Here's another great example of a different product that I like to use. It's made by Gamblin here. Let's see if the camera will focus in on it. It's a phthalo green. And this is also a 1.25 fluid ounce, very consistent size here, but it's a Series 2, and it's a little more expensive than the one we just talked about, that Series 1, which was the crimson red. So it's important to note what you're buying because you can really start to add up a lot. Now, as far as bulk goes, I buy the colors that I use the most, in bulk. And what I mean by that is tubes like this, big ass tubes, as you can see here. Now, these are cheap. This is a student grade oil color, and you can tell that there's a lot in here. Now, am I saying that you have to buy student grade oil colors? Absolutely not. If you can afford artist grade, by all means buy them. But I've been using this for a very long time, and I do that because it's a great teaching experience for me because this is what I learned on and this is what I consistently still use because it's cheap. I can make my paintings look good with it. It doesn't have to be artist grade to look like an artist's work. You can use lower quality paints just as long as you know how to use them. It's all about developing a process to utilize paints that are not maybe as best or rather as good of quality as other type of paints. Now, another question that I get a lot is, okay, so I want to buy some small, some bulk. You can see that here. I have, typically speaking, my more vibrant colors, I will buy artist grade quality or smaller tubes. And the colors that I use more often, I buy in bigger tubes. So what colors is that, or are those? Well, white is one for sure. Another one that I use a lot is burnt umber. You can tell I've kind of hit into that tube quite a bit here lately. That's also student grade oil paint. I use cadmium yellow hue a lot, but I wouldn't recommend buying it big because I've had this tube for almost 2 years now. And you can see I haven't used a lot out of it. So buy small, it's a lot cheaper, but I think this was $5, $6 total, so maybe worth it. But definitely the two that I would recommend buying in bulk are white, titanium white, and black, because you use these in every single painting. I've never not used these colors. Now, what would I recommend starting off with? Well, ideally, if you're just starting out painting, you're not gonna have a bucket or a cereal box this big full of paints. It's just too expensive. There's no way. Painting is something that you gather materials over time and use and keep and store and reuse as you progress in your artwork. So what colors would I recommend using over time? Well, let's talk about that now. Okay, restarting this video in 3, 2, 1. So as you can see here, I've lined up the colors that I think that I use the most often for you guys. So let's go through these one by one. So first off, we have titanium white. Remember, this is a student grade oil color here. These are all big containers. I have a few small ones we'll talk about in a sec, but let's just keep with these for a sec. So titanium white, ivory black, burnt umber, sap green, use that a lot. Well, I'll talk about that here in a sec. Cadmium yellow, hue. You can get light hue if you want, but just a good yellow color you can buy in bulk. I have a cobalt blue here, which is a smaller tube, but this one was pretty cheap still. I use this almost in every painting. And then a few good convenience colors to have that you can't necessarily or that you'll use most often, I guess I should say, are cadmium orange, or an orange in general. Doesn't have to be cadmium. This was cheap. This was like $3, I think. Smaller tube though, because you don't need a lot of it. It's a very strong color. You can use a very little amount. I've had this for about a year, and that's how much I've used. And a red. This is super important. It doesn't really matter what red you would get. I would rather recommend either this permanent Alizarin crimson or a cadmium red, and you can get this in a student color. It doesn't, or a student quality. It does not have to be an artist quality like this. You can buy it cheap. Same goes for this cobalt blue. You can get this in a student grade oil paint. It doesn't have to be expensive, but if I had to give you guys the colors that I use consistently in every single painting, it's these right here, because I can mix and match these colors to make different colors that I would buy separate tubes of. So I said something about a convenience color. Well, what is that? Well, orange is a great example, because orange is a color that you can make by mixing not blue and yellow, a yellow and a red together to make an orange. But by having a convenience color, an example, just a tube of orange, you don't have to mix those, so you use less paint. But I wouldn't recommend doing this until you kind of progress in your paintings, to be honest, because it's not really necessary, because honestly, mixing paints is what teaches you how to do different colors, and that's very important in the process. So I want to show you another color that I use very often, and that is cerulean blue. Well, this is a convenience color because technically speaking, you can make this by adding probably white, a very small amount of burnt umber, and cobalt blue together and mixing it in a ratio probably with some yellow to get this color. But to save yourself time and money, it really is a good investment to purchase a paint like this that you're going to use if you know that you're going to mix this color a lot. So it's really just developing your own style and own palette, which is going to let you decide what you need to use. But if anything, these are the colors that I think everyone should have in their first palette: a white, a black, a brown, a green, a yellow, a dark blue, or a blue in general, and some sort of red. So we talked about a lot today. I hope you guys got some useful information out of this because, you know, there wasn't a lot of videos when I started that really explained what the cheapest supplies were. Now, if you had to ask me about, realistically, honestly, about how much I've spent on all of this that I just showed you, with going with the basic colors, that set of 4 or 5 tubes of paint that I showed you, and only the brushes that I said I used often, I would say I spent maybe a little over $75. Now that's just for the stuff that I showed you. If I told you how much I spent on everything that I have right now, I would probably say somewhere close to $2,000 or $3,000. But the beauty of that is I haven't used any of my own money besides that initial 75, give or take a few dollars. Because I used that money to buy only what I needed, and I was smart about using the materials that I had to develop great paintings, because I then turned those paintings into a source of income, and my painting is pretty much paid for itself now, which is my original goal. You know, it's not my primary occupation, and so ideally I wanted to provide paintings to people and art for a very reasonable price. Just enough so I can continue to paint and continue to buy materials like this that get expensive. So it's important to think about only get what you need at the beginning and use what you have, develop your skills as an artist with very limited resources. And as you progress and start to make money, hopefully, on your paintings or something like that, you can buy more materials as you see fit. So thanks for joining me today, guys. I'm planning on making another video on how I prepare a canvas or a panel, which is what I've been recently painting on, and how I kind of go about blocking in my paintings. And, you know, and I'll be honest with you, it's not a method that I've developed. It's actually a method that I learned early on in my I wouldn't say career, but early on in my time as an artist. And I think it's a great method, and, you know, I think that I owe so much to other artists for teaching me how to do this method. And so stay tuned for the next video, because we're going to go through how I start blocking in a painting and how I really set up the tone for all the lines and details before I start painting, because it's the most important of a phase of a painting that I do. And it's definitely merits a video on how to do so. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you later.